Like, I don't want to give up on Milwaukee, but this is brutal. They're 1-6 in their last 7. There's all sorts of numbers I can share here at the end. What do you take from what has been probably one of the most disappointing stretches from a team that we still would have in the contender class, unless you've just written them off entirely?
The run that they had for like 4 or 5 games after the All-Star break, where people were still on, man, they're not as good under Doc as they were under Adrian Griffin. I thought that the ship had been righted. And then this last run of Washington and Memphis and some of just the worst teams in the NBA, and the splits when Lillard is there and when he's not there, and all of this is happening during an historic Giannis season of 30, 10, 60%, which we've never seen before. I think we're coming to a very interesting crossroads where I applauded the Bucks for making the move from the perspective of they avoided the sunken cost fallacy. They realized that Adrian Griffin wasn't going to be that guy that got them there. They listened to their team, and they went and they got a guy that thought that could, and they were willing to pay all of the money to coaches to not be on their staff. That takes a lot of risk. And at the time, I understood why they made the move. But if this goes the way it's trending right now, to where somehow Milwaukee takes on a Miami or a Sixers team in that first round, and they shockingly lose again, and they just gave Doc like a 4-year contract, I think that they are facing a wild circumstance where what happens if Giannis comes out after the season and comes to ownership and goes, he's not the guy either? What do you do? And so it doesn't look great. They're taking on Boston tonight. You remember last year, that Boston-Milwaukee game really changed a lot of our perspectives with the blowout in that game. But it doesn't look great. Nothing looks great. The offense, the defense, they just look scrambled, Russillo. And at this point, I don't know how you can have confidence going into the playoffs.
Yeah, this stretch where they're 1-6, they can't shoot. They're 29th in 3-point percentage. They're 12th on the season. So that's a massive departure from who they normally are. The Lillard games is maybe you look at it and go, okay, 1-7 without Lillard. So let's not focus too much on who we've been through this. Like, once we have everybody, we're going to be fine. The defensive numbers, we knew how problematic it was, considering this team is always good defensively. They're 19th overall. Before the All-Star break, they were 17th. After the All-Star break, they're 16th. The numbers have improved. That would tell you they've gotten a little bit better, but across the board, all defensive numbers are up with the way the game is being officiated. And you're right about the coach thing. Like, Griffin's got this terrific record, and yet you knew, at least kind of what you'd heard, is like Dame was out on it, and then Brook was out on it, and then eventually Giannis was like, okay, I'm out on it too. And the problem is, as you know, because you sit next to these guys all the time, if you give players a reason to doubt you, they're going to take it. And it's much like all of us. Like, if you give somebody an excuse, they'll use it. And when it's somebody who doesn't have the cachet of Doc, it's like, okay, well, it has to, like, things are different and it has to be him. I don't really know what Dame's biggest issue was. He just wasn't used to not being in control of every single offensive possession, which was the whole point of this, is that finally Dame was going to have somebody that he could lean on, and Giannis could have someone that he could lean on, and that they should be really great complementary pieces. I still hold out hope for it, but if you're Coach Bud, you've got to be like, oh, I was the problem. If you're Adrian, you've got to be thinking, oh yeah, no, it's me. And because of the Doc playoff history, which I think, I like Doc. I think he's a good coach. I'm sorry. I'll say it over and over again. But this is turning into something that not only the cost part of it that you're bringing up, like, it's at some point it has to be on the players. It has to be on the players this season to play to a level that I guess I'm stubborn on this one. And maybe it's the rest of the East other than Boston. But I'm like, are you guys like, would you really lose to Miami again after what happened last year? You think, like, even if you're trending in opposite directions, you'd be so motivated to avenge that 1-8 loss last season. Like, that should be enough, but they're just a tough watch right now.
I was thinking about this last night. I mean, everybody remembers that Giannis had a crazy fall and hurt his back in that Miami series. Like, we talk about it as though Miami just straight up went in there and beat them, and it was game 1. Giannis was a shell of himself. And I was like, why why did they move on from Budenholzer? Like, I understand that, like, it was a crushing loss and they lost in the first round and it's been disappointing and there were probably issues that were lingering, but why is that not factored into why they exited? And I understand that Giannis has always had a fascination with Dame and the combination of them in the pick and roll. I believe that this is the greatest offensive season in the history of the Milwaukee Bucks. So from that perspective, I'm sure that's been great. But you look at Drew Holiday on Boston now, and I'm having a hard time, and it's easy in retrospect to say, but understanding why it was such a rush to move on from Budenholzer and Drew. When I just spent 2.5 weeks with Jay Wright, who is better than advertised, like one of the greatest human beings you'll ever hang out with, and who also has been involved in Team USA basketball now for 2 decades with Popovich and Kerr, and he has stories on all these NBA guys. And when I was talking to him about the USA team, about like, how does it work? Like, who do you guys call first? The first name he said was Drew Holiday. He said, that's the guy that we had to get because he's the tone setter. He's the model citizen. He's the one that comes in and sets the tone. And so when I hear that from Jay, and it's just like effusing praise, and I think about that Giannis injury, I look back and I don't understand why the change. Who said, I'm not doing this unless there's a change? I have an idea, but I don't know. It just seems kind of crazy to me.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Giannis thing because it'll always be forgotten. He played half of the available minutes in that playoff series, and that's a factor when you're talking about one of the 3 best players in the league. But it still was so weird at the end to watch them just be done. Like mentally, they seemed like they were shot. Their confidence was shot. It's like, wait, this is really going to happen? And then, of course, that was the intro into what Miami was going to do in the playoffs last season, which I still think is one of the most unprecedented runs that we've seen in modern history. But considering like what Bud had gone through personally too, and they still were like, nope, we're good. And it's very easy now that we have the results to replay the history of it. But I think there was always like a stubbornness with Bud that you just knew exactly what it was going to be. And clearly it worked well enough. I mean, the guy's going to ring, but when they were losing, that stubbornness seemed to be something they just couldn't get past. They go with something that we've seen a lot with franchises where it's like, let's get a younger guy in here, somebody that played, who's been an assistant. Like that's been the trend for a lot of off seasons here, and then see how it works. And then as soon as they were checked out on him, look, I'm just more of a, hey, it's on the players than it is the coaches. In football, it's entirely different. College football sets the tone with the guy who's your CEO. In the NFL, we've seen it too many times where somebody can come in, a couple tweaks here, a couple turnovers there, and then all of a sudden he's turned this thing around. In the NBA, you don't have somebody just take over a 30-win team and then all of a sudden they're a contender. But when I look at them, part of my hope is still like, what am I supposed to do with the Knicks? What am I supposed to do with the Cavs? I like Orlando. I don't love their closing offense in a tight playoff game. Maybe it's Philly with Embiid, but I don't think Embiid even looks close. I think it's remarkable he's even out there right now, and maybe he works himself into shape, but working himself into shape in the playoffs when he hasn't been successful. So I'm still like looking at the rest of the teams going, I'm supposed to pick them and throw Miami in there as well, who's now healthy again. I'm supposed to pick one of them against Milwaukee, and I don't think I'm going to do it as bad as this has looked.